Everyone, welcome to the UNSW Bachelor of Design Industry Insights Lecture Series for Core Design Studio 3. That is the last time I will say that for this term. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which our campus stands, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So today is our last class for term, and subsequently this means this will be our last lecture for the series. We really hope you have enjoyed this series, and I'm hoping it's given you some valuable insight into the design industry, which really encompasses so many different disciplines, and hopefully opened your eyes to the many possibilities, opportunities, pathways for you as designers beyond university. Speaking of opportunities, I wanted to let you know that despite COVID-19, the Sydney Design Week hybrid exhibition will be going ahead in a physical sense at MAS, the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, this September. So keep that in mind as you reframe your work into the digital portfolio presentation pieces. We will be selecting a number of collectives and or individual works to present to Stephen Todd and Kenton Butler for consideration into this exhibition. So I'm hoping that's a motivating factor for you as you reframe your physical exhibition into your digital piece. Just one little other piece of housekeeping before I introduce today's speaker. I would like you all, if you haven't yet, to participate in the My Experience survey. You really wouldn't believe how incredibly valuable your feedback is to us. So if you can make just 10 minutes of time to set aside to fill in the survey, particularly because this is the first time Studio 3 has run in this format. We'd love your feedback on the lecture series and just the course itself. So thank you very much in advance for doing that. Now I will introduce our speaker today. We're incredibly excited to welcome Daniel Federici, who is currently in Milan. Well, actually, he works in Milan as the jewellery studio manager for Bottega Veneta. And Daniel, you've got to correct me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Daniel's another successful graduate of the Bachelor of Design degree and will be giving us his insight into his journey from UNSW Art and Design to Milano, where he's working for one of Italy's famous luxury goods and high fashion brands. I have to let you guys know that at the moment in Italy, it is 6 AM. So we're incredibly grateful to Daniel for getting up so early to present to you. And as some of you may know, in August, literally the whole of Italy closes down for the month of August. So Daniel's actually on holiday. So not only has he got up early, but he's got up early on his holiday to talk to us. So we're incredibly grateful. Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming today to chat to the students. And I'm just going to hand over to you now and welcome you on behalf of all of us.
Perfect. Thanks, Emma. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we sure can. Perfect.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's 6 AM here, but I'm totally fine. It should be 100% manageable. Hi, guys. I'm Daniel. As Emma briefly introduced, I'm now actually head of design for jewelry at Bottega Veneta. So I'm going to start with a little presentation just to show you where I started off. So let me see if I can do this without any technical difficulty. Okay. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see this now. So basically,
sorry, Daniel, I might get you to share your screen. Sorry, I think it's just
okay.
Just the share factor. That's all we need, and then it'll be up and running.
Okay, I think we're.
Just still waiting for it to come in. So I'll actually stop sharing my screen And yep, that's perfect. It's coming in now.
Perfect. All good?
All good.
Sweet. Perfect. Thanks, Emma. So basically, I now manage all of the, I guess, design and direction for the jewelry categories at Bottega Veneta. But I will start with, I guess, my grad work. So I grew up in Jervis Bay, about 3 hours south of Sydney, and I guess I didn't really come from the most creative family. But I think part of my process has always been making. So from a really young age, I was doing ceramics and everything quite hands-on, or something that's just very tactile, and it's always been a part of my process. So I'll start probably with my journey, or I guess with the starting point. This was actually my grad work, and I won't go too heavily into it. But basically, for my final year, I created a rose gold prosthetic leg for a pigeon that didn't actually, he had a deformed leg, and I turned it into, I guess, this kind of theoretical experiment. And I just wanted to share that today, I guess, because for a lot of students out there, I think it's really important, or something that I probably wanted to hear when I was studying, which was like this naive concept of being overly contrived or overly thinking, or not really understanding, I guess, the industry you would like to go into, or the discipline, or how you would apply, I guess, some of the disciplines that you're probably undertaking towards your final years of study, and how you can actually eventually put that into some kind of practice. One, to make money, but two, to actually find a development and a process for yourself that's both meaningful and, I guess, satisfactory to then push on later in life. For me, it's always been, I guess, jewelry in the back of my head, or something very 3D. So for me, this was a very, very, looking back when I look on it, very, very blissfully, in terms of, it's a project that I still admire. But I would say that this was a starting point for me in terms of a sculptural form, in terms of understanding how to apply very, very simple making, traditional crafts, silversmithing, into, I guess, a visual language. Which is something that you'll have consistently throughout your career. And probably the biggest principle I would say that you could ever hold on to from your studies would be the idea of a visual language. So no matter what you do, or no matter where you start, I find, for me personally, even going through fashion and going through the industry that I've worked in, having to work with, I guess, many creative directors, they each have a very specific visual language, and you kind of have to adapt to that. So it's nice to start with this point. So from graduating, basically, I started in my last year, I went to London and I did some internships with places like Vivienne Westwood. I did an internship with Gareth Pugh also, and then from there, and from graduating, I met a lot of people in the community, specifically back in Sydney. So after my internships, and also, guys, I would love to stress the point of just start working. I think my biggest practice in my final year was I would make so many different physical proposals to send to the studios or designers that I admired and loved. And I would probably work on them on the evenings and weekends, and from there I would make contacts and receive emails back. And it was super important to gain, even if it wasn't related to the field that I was working in, it was super, super valuable, because I had this breadth of work where I could actually develop small proposals for designers, and then put those proposals back into my portfolio. So from that, I was actually able to get a design position to work with Kim Ellery in Sydney after my internships in London. It was probably one of the most incredible experiences, because Kim, from a really early standpoint, so as you can see on screen, this is just a quick display of some of the products from the first collection that we did together, which I'll run through very quickly in a second. It's it's super important because I guess at the time, Ellery didn't have a jewelry category, and I actually came on as an assistant. So I was doing anything from print work to graphic work and anything that I guess I could get my hands on because she didn't know me. It was just important for me to show her what I could do at the time. So at this point, off my own accord, I saw a gap in the market for her business. So these are actually the original sketches that I showed her. Because I wanted to push so heavily the idea of jewelry, and at that point in time of my career, I couldn't find a way to commercialize what I had learned or what I wanted to do. So with this internship or with this position that I was given at Ellery, I basically wanted to develop these prototypes for her in hopes that she would actually shoot them, which then later she did, and then it actually grew into one of the biggest categories for the business. So as you can see here, I make as much as I can physically out of either prototyping with resin molds. It really depends on the material that I work with. So for example, a lot of this collection was made out of acetates first, just to get the weights right. And basically anything that I can get my hands on, I will, just obviously depending on time because the industry does move very, very quickly. So I'll just go through some of the product now. I mean, this collection was super important. It was for, I guess, for the brand and for the actual design team. It was by Nina Simone. So a really beautiful, beautiful jazz and blues singer. So a lot of the instruments and the brass band instruments came through the actual pieces. They are huge and they are heavy, but there is a monolithic sense to the actual design sensibility about Ellery. It's hardware focused. It's a sculptural. Yeah. I mean, the projects were super, super beautiful. So again, just showing you a bit of the process, and then from here, basically the collections grew, and it was that moment that I decided to basically just to give it a go and to try and develop something on my own based off the skills that I've learned without any invitation. And I would say that that's probably been the most valuable thing for me, is that to understand your purpose and to understand that design isn't just about waiting for a position to be handed to you or specifically working in fashion anyway, and understanding that it is design and not art, but you can still marry the two sensibilities about it to kind of carve your own path. You don't need to follow any prerequisite. You don't need to follow any idea of what a discipline might be. You can define your own process to make whatever you want. It's completely independent and can be very autonomous, which can be very, very rewarding. So these products are just different collections for Ellery that I've done. The pieces grew, like the collections I would say started from I think about 9 pieces and grew upwards to say 40 to 50 pieces. And then within the last seasons that I did for Ellery, I would say we were up in maybe the 120 per season. So what was really exciting, so just a little bit of my process, I drape with fabrics, I drape with hardware. I do anything that I can do to basically explain the process to the creative director or to basically to the design team before the prototype is actually made. I guess working in fashion is very different to working in, I guess, an individual studio or say a traditional craft. I do have budgets and I have a full collection to oversee in terms of not only just the jewelry, but to associate it back to the ready to wear. Which is super important because at the end of the day, this kind of idea of accessorizing or styling becomes maybe more prevalent in a lookbook or a campaign. And then depending on, I guess, the direction, very important for a show also. So then as I go through the pieces, I'll just explain just a little bit how I went from Sydney to Paris. So Ellery actually made a transition from their design studio in Sydney to basically follow the trajectory of the brand onto Paris Fashion Week. So from the starting points of working in Sydney, I was able to move to Paris with Kim to help set up the business there. We showed on schedule, I think, for about 2 years. Which was an amazing experience. It opened my eyes to lots of things that I don't think many Australian designers get to experience. It was an amazing time, which then led into a couture event, which was a new transition for the brand. It meant that every process we were accepted onto the Champs de Décal, which basically is a formal recognition that Ellery could be on the couture calendar for Fashion Week. It basically meant that we needed to dedicate certain amounts of hours and materials to the product in order for it to meet a standard of which it to be shown against other brands like Dior and Vuitton and things like that. So it was a whole new challenge, but it was very exciting. So some of these pieces were actually shown during my last collection. So for example, this was the cat's eye marble that was developed in-house. We hand enameled the internal, set it in resin, and then it's just coated in sterling silver and then plated in gold. All of these pieces have a very lovely place in my memories, and they're pieces that I always often refer back to because they are so sculptural. And I guess the other beautiful thing about having a lot of this work is seeing it in the media. So there's lots of cover works from a lot of these pieces. I've done personal orders for people like Solange or Beyonce. It was a really exciting time at Ellery, actually. And then just to show you a little bit of the presentation process. So in order to basically get approvals or to ensure there is a cohesive, I guess, language that goes throughout the collection that marries with the ready-to-wear, a lot of these boards are presented like this. So hand illustrated, sometimes hand painted, and then basically they would be presented back to the team. And they would show either the scales, the materials, the colors, and it would then evolve into physical prototypes and the actual finished samples. So it was always really exciting to see a lot of my really shitty hand, like clay, almost Play-Doh-like elements then being transformed into these really beautiful objects, which is very much what Ellery was. It was about understanding this difference between how could we develop an idea into something that was both wearable, still striking in terms of a jewelry piece, but very much could stand alone as an object by itself. So we had lots of mechanical elements. How could we use traditional craft in a brand new way that still felt timeless? So that when it went down the runway, it created a really beautiful juxtaposition on not only the model, but also just as a physical piece itself. So this became a very big signature for Ellery, and very much identified with, I guess, my personal craft, which I guess you can kind of go back to that pigeon project that that I started at Kofa. So that idea of like that tactile sculptural element, or something that resonated with material form in its rawest manner, and being, I guess, transformed into something quite beautiful and still, it became very much a part of my language, even at Bottega Veneta now. So, and then pushing forward, just some other pieces of my work. While I was at Ellery, actually, it wasn't just the jewelry that I worked on. I developed the shoes as well. So it was also really great having to have a lot of control, or a lot of like experience, I guess, with a lot of the different categories. As the jewelry began to grow, so did the business, and then so did other categories, and we had the chance and the budget to develop more, which was really fantastic. This is just an example of the prototyping process that I would go through. So a lot of the styles are made out of brass, or I would get sheets of acetate, and then you can see the lovely models on the right. And then basically it would be a trial and error. And I would say one of my biggest key takeaways from my time at Ellery is the idea of editing. So I think it's so important as a designer, and more important working in the fashion industry specifically. Whenever I talk about this kind of process, it is somewhat specific to fashion, but can be applied to anything. But this idea of a curated sensibility and a curated idea of editing, that no idea will be perfect first. So never get frustrated, never get upset that you can never maybe achieve what's directly in your head to begin with. It's so important to start, and it's so important to keep pushing, because design for me, it's just about development and almost about setting yourself up to fail a little bit, because at the end of the day, a lot of these prototypes would not have got to the stage of I guess, completion or the beauty of the final product if honestly I didn't make them maybe 6 to 8 times. Because for me, design is more about how you can push yourself and how fast you can do it. So that means making paper models, developing your own process. It's purely about communication. So if you can basically start with something, anything, and then keep pushing it, it's never ending. You could do it for the next 3 years if you really wanted to, for just one single idea. The best inventors have always done something and just focused on one concept. But it's one of these things where to create a product, it doesn't have to stop if you don't want it to. So to be able to edit and curate and then look back on these process images, it's so important, because you'll see an evolution from something that's very, very naive to something that's very profound. So I would say if you could take away anything as a designer or a maker, it is to edit and to stop and think as you're making, photograph it, look at it, redraw it. Because if you're just making something that's coming straight from an idea or a reference or a research image or something, I promise you, unless you're an absolute genius, it won't have the same impact as if you've gone through and edited it, which has been such a big, I guess, component of my process. I photograph things, I illustrate them again, and then over the photographs, I keep reposting the images until it gets to the very point that I know that I want it to be at. And that can take weeks, it can take months. It's all about being patient. So again, here is just some renders on the left and some raw brass from my studio on the right. So again, just trying to understand proportions and getting everything right. These are some other editorials, which were really, really great. And then basically from Ellery, I decided, I think maybe 2 years ago, I think it's coming up to 2 years now, to basically start my own business, which was basically taking on clients in Paris. When I moved to Paris, it was very easy to make contacts and make relationships, because the community there is somewhat welcoming, but also quite small. So from there, I started a freelance business, and I worked for brands like Hermès, Vuitton, Jean Patou, and some smaller independent labels. And then it really helped me develop, I guess, this international standing of what design could represent. So I got to work in really beautiful studios and really, really, really amazing houses with incredible heritages off the back of my experience with Ellery. So Ellery around Europe and around the design scene became quite known. So it was very easy for me to identify, or it was very easy for them to identify my work, which was really helpful for me to basically get in the doors, to be able to have these meetings with talent acquisitions from Kering and LVMH and these big businesses that I would have never dreamt that I would have probably been able to work with as I was studying, to be honest. So as I developed my process, which I was really, really thankful for at Ellery, it allowed for this progression into brands like Hermès and Vuitton to develop product for them. And so seasonally, I would come in and develop a small range for Hermès, which was really great. It was quite difficult at the time because basically for the bijou, which is basically they consider a fashion category, and then the other alternative is a fine jewelry category. For Hermès, it was predominantly leather. So I had to find ways to incorporate leather into physical products without using too much silver or metal. Which meant basically using these kind of vacuum sealed ideas, brooches, ideas of enamels and horns, and which was a really, really great process. And then another project that I worked on while in Paris was Jean Patou. So LVMH bought Jean Patou about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago. It was a brand in the 1930s, around the time when Paco Rabanne was very, very prominent. And basically they bought it to rejuvenate, and they wanted to rebrand it under the creative director of Guillaume Henry. He's an amazing creative director. He worked at Carven for close to 8 years, maybe even 10 years. And he has a really, really beautiful traditional French mentality. And his design process is very similar to mine. So what was really exciting about this project that I got to work on was it was like the Ellery process. I got to start from scratch. So I got to start with nothing and just work with the creative director on building a category for the business, which was, again, something so personal and something so lovely that I got to inject something that was very much a part of myself. He obviously loved the sculptural work that I did for Ellery, so there are elements that do cross over, but for him it was very much about creating this other world, this idea of I guess like a lost civilization in his head. The pieces are very oversized and hand rendered and hand finished, so the things that he loved were those slight imperfections. So similar process, similar sketching process, and then prototyping as well, and basically coming up with these collaged cultural elements to kind of sit back with these very, very traditional garments that he was making. So the brand is very feminine and very, very, very somewhat commercial. So he wanted this very lavish kind of gold silhouette on the ear and on the neck to kind of throw or confuse the viewer, because for him that sculptural form was so important to, I guess, tell his story. So a lot of these motifs were taken actually from photographs around Paris, from fountains and from like the facades of buildings and the decals and things like that, and we applied them to the actual physical form on the rings and on these brooches. And I sometimes, if I have time, I'll hand carve things out of wax. Again, it very much does come down to time. I work with, just to also tell you a little bit about how we manufacture. So for this process and for a lot of the fashion houses, what's a very typical process is to work just with sketches, and then you work with external suppliers across the world, predominantly in Italy, but also across Asia. They're incredible suppliers that basically will very much understand a technical drawing and be able to reproduce it for you. What was really important for me and for elements of these ranges was to have this hand finish. So a lot of these pieces I did make in-house. In Paris, I had my studio set up, so I was able to make a lot of them without, or at least the master, I guess, without the aid of a manufacturer until there was the production handover. But what was really important during this phase was feasibility. So to make sure from a commercial standpoint that it was possible to manufacture these for the consumer. So per one piece, there may be an order of 1,000. So what's really important is that as I make this, I think to myself, okay, is someone going to be able to make this in a repetition of 1,000 times? Because if not, it's not a sellable product, and that commercial viability is super, super, super important for the industry, because at the end of the day, anyone can make anything random, but that concise sensibility to at least achieve something that is both approachable for a consumer and also affordable as well is super important. So with this collection, I worked with 2 suppliers, one in Italy and one in Indonesia. And the one in Indonesia basically had a little bit more of a hand, an organic surface treatment, which they were used to working with. But yeah, I mean, this was an awesome collection. It was a really, really, really beautiful project I got to work on. And this now takes me to my current position. So at the moment, I am working with an amazing team at Bottega Veneta. It's one of the most incredible experiences that I've gotten to do. The control and ideas and process and everything down to material innovation, everyone's dedication and pursuit of real design and real traditional craft, I would have to say is one of the most rewarding things that I've had to be a part of or wanted to be a part of. There's a real sense of making from every category within the brand, and you can see that within the product. It takes a lot to distill an idea down into its purest form, and I think that's what I've taken away the most having worked in very sculptural ways and very big and bold, and now having to, I guess, refine my ideas down to such a concise manner, where you acknowledge, I guess, the consumer who's actually purchasing the product, which is, for me, I guess, like a really lovely like evolution on top of everything that I've done, because it really creates a really beautiful contrast between art and design, and makes you appreciate what a function is, which for me is super important now. When I was designing for Ellery, and when I was doing things that were maybe more as an object, as a wearable object, they were void of human sometimes. And looking back on my work, I still very much appreciate it. But there's an egocentric, I guess, notion about creating wearable art, because you almost want your talent or your idea to be seen before the person. And I guess having to strip that back down into this, which is very much a cohesive image of both the person and the product, still very sculptural and still very pushed and directional, but you're acknowledging the wearer. And I guess it's about that relationship for the brand, which I think is something that I will always remember, because being able to strip and edit and curate and pull everything back to that idea that it doesn't need to be loud, it doesn't need to be screaming. It's about something that is very, very pure and very authentic. So on the right is just one of the chain links. This was the pre-spring campaign, I think, on Jean Campbell, which is probably one of my favorite pictures so far in the campaign series. And then going on to, which I'm sure some of you have seen, the Cuban links, which has become a bit of a Bottega signature that we've done. So as the seasons have gone on, we've integrated new materials, and the engineering and material innovation that's evident throughout the brand has been very much pushed through the jewelry. So on the right, this is me basically and my general process. I take photos of everything as within every stage to make sure that within my head everything is kind of falling into place. And on the right, you can see the Cuban links that we've developed for Bottega. And then every contrast link is actually a radical wood. So it's a really beautiful, almost like a burled wood that's been set in place link by link, basically, and then cosmetically soldered when you link them back together, so they appear flush. Treating woods and stone as precious materials, as we've done with this necklace in forms of lapis and malachite and other precious stones. It's been really, really interesting to develop semi-precious stones and materials into new, like small, I guess, micro sculptures, and finding out ways to carve and recut stone into modern forms. It's been actually really, really, really rewarding. So just to show you again the difference of material. So again, using the radical wood, you can see the grain, and then basically the interwoven silver, and then just some mock-ups and the finished product on the right. Leather's always a really big, important material for the brand. We use it across everything, including the jewelry. It's one of Bottega's heritage signatures. So it's something that is always prevalent in every collection. This probably has to be one of my favorite pieces that I've ever made. The idea of not using any metal or as little metal as possible, but actually setting diamonds into the wood. So basically this is the same radical wood that you saw. And then I think there was something about 120 baguette diamonds that were set within the facade of each element, which was then stacked together. It was then used in the show and the campaign. It was a really, really, really beautiful story. Just the idea of a brown and white tone on the neck, again, representing that really lovely relationship between form and function, and principles that I'm sure you're learning right now. But it's really nice to practice it, to be totally honest, because you sit there and you imagine your designs on a model or whoever it may be for, or even for yourself. And it really is lovely to acknowledge, I guess, that end point, where it's going, why it's going there, what's the purpose. And just some shots of these. again, just process shots, working with materials, trying to understand how they can be achieved, wrapping. The intrecciato for Bottega Veneta is the interwoven lock. So basically, I'm sure if you're familiar with Bottega as a brand, that interweave or interwoven leather, that's super iconic for the label. We try and reappropriate it as much as possible. These are some of my favorite earrings as well. The spirals become quite a signature for Bottega, so we've done them in a lot of forms. And then just some other product as well, which I'll go through a little bit quicker. But again, still using lots of sculptural elements, focused on form, but just trying to make it representable for the brand, which I'm sure you can kind of see the, I guess the progression from where I started with Ellery to now working with a luxury house, which has very strict, or not strict, but very particular customers, or a very particular guideline in terms of its product execution. So it does need to be far more concise, far more considered. Again, using the Radica, every season we try and develop something in a new material. And for me, using not poor materials, it's a bad word, but using materials that are uncommon to a luxury company and making them feel expensive has been a really important tool in redeveloping Bottega under Daniel Lee. So I would say, what else have we used? We've used cork, paper. This season I'm developing something with paper mache. This is a clay series we did during my first season. You can see all the prototypes on the left, and then basically this was used for the show, and then other products for the commercial offering. Hand-painted pearls. One of the really beautiful things about working in Italy is working with a lot of different artisanal houses. So Italy has some of the most amazing suppliers or artisans that have been working for generations. So this is actually maybe a 150-year-old studio that only works with enamel. And so basically I was able to take my illustrations and we could apply them with a fine single hair brush on every pearl. So there was one woman, and she's incredible. Sadly, these sold quite a lot. This is probably not a good representation of thinking about production, but we developed these with animals and pictorials and like loads of different illustrations, which worked really beautifully for the collection. And then basically every pearl, I think for every illustration, maybe 900 to 1,000 was ordered. So she had to sit there painstakingly re-illustrate consistently as best she could each illustration again and again and again. And she was the only studio, from my understanding, across Europe that was able to do something on such a small scale. These are just a nice example of some of our traditional hand-cut stone. So at the top, you've got tiger's eye lapis and then a yellow quartz. And then just going to some of the latest pieces, which was actually released this week. We did a big macrame story to kind of play with this idea of, again, a poor material using string or using this idea of netting. I'm trying to make it feel expensive, and a part of my process is to make as many drapes as possible until that final execution just fits perfectly with the collection. And here's some more as an example, and just some drapes as well. But again, I can't stress the idea of identifying your process enough. The idea of developing not just a discipline or not just a craft, but a way to communicate your language is so important, and has probably become something that is so vital for me to then get future work or future jobs, or being able to identify where my sources have come from. So for example, with this necklace, it started with a clay rendering that I then sliced in half and created a helix. It was very simple. But being able to show, I guess, a recruiter, a brand, someone I want to work for, where that idea came from and how it originated, the more individual you can be about that process and the more beautiful, or the way you can display that, I promise you, is far more valuable than anything you'll ever learn. Every artist, every famous musician will always talk about their process. And it's nothing to be scared of if you don't have it yet, and it's nothing to be scared of if you are still working through what that may represent to you. Because at the end of the day, every discipline that you're now learning, I guess, in university, will be applied later on, and you'll understand it as you get older. But working through it and trying and failing and editing and all of these things that I've been speaking about, it's extremely valuable to then pick up the things that you find, I guess, that resonate with you, be it if you work with clay or if you work with illustrating. Keep pushing it, because if you can then start with an idea and then make it quite tangible, being able to show that process to someone will not only help them to understand where you're coming from or where your ideas come from, but it'll help you to find such an amazing process later on, which it's more valuable than any portfolio or any label, anything that you could possibly work with, because you'll be able to apply that to anything. So if you wanted to go and work in shoes, or if you wanted to go and start your own studio, that process will carry you through every side of it. Just some illustrating work and some other materials that we've used as well. So that's rattan wicker on the left, which was heat set and turned into a really beautiful choker. And that's it, guys. That was actually just a sculpture that we just did in Shanghai as well. So I will try and get Emma back.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi.
Hey. I'm just going to just pop you up on the screen there. The picture isn't fantastic, but your voice is loud and clear, so we will definitely be able to keep chatting, and we've got quite a few questions here from the students for you. I don't know if you can see those, but I might shout out a couple that I can see on the screen now. The first one is, how do you see the purpose of design and luxury brands in the future?
Probably more relevant than ever, I would say. I guess the biggest misconception of luxury fashion is that it's just expensive. What people need to understand, that a lot of the luxury houses practice craft, and a lot of the things that they value are the same values that independent designers hold. So they don't align with fast fashion, and they don't align with the principles of wastage. So the idea that something is expensive isn't just for the sake of it being cool. It's for the sake of it coming from a craft and an element where you've devoted the people that we work with anyway, across Italy, and I mean, everything has to be made in Italy for us, but they're artists and they get paid well, they're represented, they have unions, everything, but they're traditional craft makers, and that's why everything is so expensive, is because genuinely the product is expensive to make. So I would say more so than ever, going through maybe the next 10 to 20 years, specifically during this time as well, I would say it's so important to go back to roots of proper craft making. And I feel like even now, some of the numbers that are coming out in the past couple months, the luxury industry has been hit by COVID, obviously, but still there are profitable elements that have come out, and there are jobs. I guess there is job security across the sector, just purely because people are appreciating the idea of holding on to something and the sentimental factor that comes with luxury goods, and not that you would just throw it away. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Daniel, I might just get you to stop sharing your screen at the moment. I'm hoping that might have some effect on the amount of content that is coming through. That's good, thank you. Now, another question we have: in such a saturated market as fashion design, what advice would you give to someone looking to stand out successfully? I feel like you have answered that quite well, but if you would like to elaborate more.
Yeah. No, it's super important. I mean, there was a point in my life that I was still asking that question, well, like 2-3 years into my actual career. Nothing will, like, the simplest way I can ever say is nothing will make sense in your early 20s. It's really simple. It just won't. So sadly, there is an annoying process in your 20s where you basically feel, and I'm sorry for my language, but you feel a little fucked, and you're like, you sit there and you're like, okay, what is this? And you want to be heard and you want to be listened to, and you know you have a voice and you know you have something to share. If you are persistent and if you are dedicated and if you keep at it, I promise you it will come through. Like no matter if you think you're good or bad or whatever, that dedication and that perseverance to continue to try will beat anyone, I promise you, with copious amounts of skill that just gives up because they're too lazy. It's probably the biggest bit of advice, because I would say some of the best designers that I know are the ones that have persevered through the hardest times, wanting to be heard, and wanting, I guess, some kind of recognition for the work that they've done, which will come if you stick with it. Because at the end of the day, I would say almost every designer that I know didn't start off being amazing. They push through and they learn, but honestly, start somewhere. Don't wait. I wouldn't wait till you graduate. Go find someone that really resonates with you, that you admire, you can learn something from, and then from there, I promise you, it's a snowball effect.
That is such great advice. This is why I love this lecture series, because it's real and the students can can put all this kind of advice into context, and also especially some of the things you've talked about today about, you know, the importance of process, distilling an idea into its purest form, and the fact that you've just got to start making and just start doing something is such fantastic advice to the students.
For sure.
Now, I've got another question here from Olivia. Your work is so beautiful. Do you have any tips for jewelers still developing their skills, looking to land their first job to get into the industry? Again, I think you probably have covered some of this in your chat, but if you want to...
Totally fine. Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the best things you can do very early on in your career is understand whether or not you want to be a jeweler for yourself, or you want to go and work for, say, a brand or a fashion house. I'll answer the second one for working for a fashion house just from my experience, because it's a very personal thing to have your own studio and work with materials that you get to choose. You can like pick your own projects. You get to work very one-on-one with clients. You can exhibit. It's a very autonomous, by yourself, independent. It's great. Working for fashion houses means almost completely giving up control. So there is an element where if you can at least associate, or if you can make that decision very early on, it'll I don't know, it'll make the process less chaotic for you. So to start with, I would start, if you wanted to work with fashion brands, I would start aligning your portfolio, or I guess your work, or the things you want to do at the projects you're doing at university. I would start aligning them with brands you'd like to work with later on. And it's what a lot of fashion students do in Europe. So basically, during the MAs or during their undergraduate courses, I see a lot of portfolios where they instantly say, recognize Bottega. And in their final year, they will appropriate projects specifically tailored to Bottega's aesthetic. It won't be for Bottega, but you can very much see that they've taken on principles from what we're doing to then land them a position, so I can go, okay, they understand the brand. I can very much see their process. I can very much see that they understand how to take an idea and execute it, and at what standard it is, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say if you wanted to land yourself your first job in fashion or in one of those brands, I would try and tailor projects to, I guess, one of the brands that you would actually like to work with.
Well, that's a really nice segue into the next question, actually, Daniel. So an anonymous says, have you ever felt restricted in your creativity or design style by moving from a place like Ellery, where you had more freedom, to Bottega? And are you still able to bring your personal design style into your work for Bottega?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'm not gonna lie. When I first started at Bottega, having such a free hand at Ellery, and even for some of the more personal projects that I've worked on, I thought in my head, or I guess in myself, I very much thought I lost a part of myself, because it was super important to have that freedom, and I very much controlled a lot of these elements, and having to work under such a big company. you do have to dedicate some kind of cooperation with the other parts of the business. And but to be honest, no, I would say if like I ended the lecture in it, understanding a different part of my process doesn't mean that it's gone. If anything, I value more what I've done at Bottega than what I've done at Ellery, only because anyone can be random. Anyone can do sculptural elements. I promise you, if I gave you a sheet of metal, a piece of paper, and some zirconia stones, you could make something amazing. What for me is a true designer, and what for me is a true innovator, or someone who I appreciate and admire the most, is someone that can take all of those principles that you think are free, that you think are so intrinsic to your personality, and pull them back into the, like I said, the purest form where they still are represented, but you acknowledge what it is. Like at the end of the day, I'm making product, and I don't want to lie to myself. I don't want to overdevelop or contrive the idea. If I wanted to go through an art process, I would study art, or I would go and do pieces purely to exhibit. So I would say right now, I would say I actually have the same amount of freedom, the same amount of design exercises I did in Ellery. If anything, I've just disciplined myself more. That's it.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. Just a couple more questions here. Thank you.
No, go for it.
Amazing insight. This is just absolutely brilliant. Now, Sarah, who is one of our producers, you can see her waving down the bottom there, has asked, have you found you've needed to upskill technically as a jeweler or maker along the way, or have your manufacturing skills and understanding of these processes been something that's developed naturally alongside your professional career trajectory?
Both. Like I would say by upskilling, I haven't done any more education in terms of courses, but definitely I have. So one of my favorite things to do during a season, and just so I guess I can make it clear, a fashion season technically should last 12 weeks. So within that 12 weeks, I have, I know, I have maybe, say for Bottega, across for men's and women's, maybe 150 products to make. So it's a very, very, very fast process. You have about 10 days to come up with concepts, ideas, materials, present it, get it approved, go right into prototyping, start making masters. So in order to get that speed, I had to upskill 100%. But the way I did it was to sit with the people that I know. So the people that I admire, if I wasn't competent in something, I would go and find it. I really would. So for example, in Sydney, I found makers. I went to Square Peg also, which was silversmithing out of Newtown. And in Europe, when I was in Paris, there were beautiful artisans that I needed to learn about enameling when I worked with Hermes. I didn't know anything about leather, so I went to a shoemaker. There are elements where if I needed to find a source, I would, because basically all the information's there. You can always upskill. It doesn't mean you have to basically go and re-educate yourself. You just have to find the right source to go and basically treat it like a project, treat it like you would any of your university projects. But definitely some of my most valuable moments have been working with the suppliers that I work with in Italy. And it's not a daunting process either. I wouldn't ever say just because you've never worked with a supplier doesn't mean that you can't. It's basically the same thing as talking to one of your lecturers, or anyone, to be honest. If you can communicate your idea, if you can sketch something and show something, that's as simple as it can be. Anyone who wants to apply for, I guess, a fashion brand, specifically, it's just about communicating your idea. If you're awesome at paper mache and you can show someone how to paper mache your finished result, if you can sketch whatever, that's how you work with the supplier. It's just about communicating your idea.
I think we were talking today with the students about working efficiently is a learnt skill. And that's just the fact that you're saying in 12 weeks from concept through to final outcome, you have over 100 products that you produce. It really is incredible to hear about that efficiency of process and speed of process, definitely, but also being effective, and it's incredible. And a great insight for the students who are working on, a finite amount of deliverables over a 12-week time frame as well. We might just have one more question as we're starting to wrap up for time. Daniel, I've got a question here from David, who says, inspiring work. There's an impression that you've moved from very delicate, organic and idiosyncratic forms through to chunkier, simpler forms for Bottega Veneta. Is that just a natural progression or a function of commercial demand? Can you comment on that? I guess you probably have answered part of that question already, but if you'd like to elaborate again.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say the product that I'm doing for Bottega now is far more complicated. So to have a product have a sense of ease and have a sense of relaxed manner, it's really hard to achieve, I promise you, especially in such a solid form as metal or such a solid form as anything relating to jewelry. Having something feel effortless, it takes me far more time now than I ever did at Ellery or anywhere else. So I would say I haven't lost anything. There was definitely a more earthy, organic feel to my work at Ellery and even my work at Patou, and but with that came a quicker reaction. So for example, if I wanted to just focus on material and just create a form, I could do it in an hour. It's a very quick process. It's it's a very natural thing that happens for me. The bolder, more simplistic forms that I'm doing for Bottega, they honestly take me weeks. Because with the stone settings, everything that we do is so engineered that even the way that it's strung, dealing with the weights, it's not so much about a commercial demand from Bottega. It's actually more so the direction that I've wanted to take Bottega. So we could have applied the same organic feels that I've done with Ellery. We could have done a lot of the sculptural elements that I've done. But specifically for now, given the time that we're in at the moment, that is very much about, like I've already discussed, like the idea of traditional craft being reappropriated for 2020 and 2021, and even ideas around COVID and things like that. I don't think people really want to see extravagant things. They want to see timeless things and classic elements that are very sentimental and very personal and almost like heirlooms. So for me, defining that for the brand was really important. There are still sculpturings in the material and the ingenuity around the material we do every season. It takes so much testing. Turning wood, turning stone, and everything around that is far more complicated than any of those more organic forms. So I would say that they're very, very, very similar in terms of the process that I would do. One just is a little bit more complicated in final execution, that's it.
Daniel, we might have to wrap up for time there. I just really can't thank you enough for the insight, the inspiration, the advice that you've given the students today. It's been absolutely fantastic. We're so grateful again that you were able to talk to us, especially from the other side of the world, especially on your holidays, especially at 6 a.m. in the morning. We're incredibly grateful. Thank you so much, and hopefully we can stay in touch.
Definitely.
Over the next period of time, and we really look forward to hopefully catching up again soon.
For sure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. See you, Daniel.
Thank you. See you guys. Bye.